Hi everyone and welcome to a new video. So over the Christmas holidays, the fabric stores where I live have been having some major sales, especially in the lead up to the new year. I managed to score a heap of new patterns, including vintage Vogue patterns. I've always wanted to make vintage or vintage inspired clothing, but I could never justify buying patterns full price. The one I'm using today was only $5, and in addition to the patterns I bought, I also bought plenty of fabric. My favourite fabrics are linen and cotton, which I never buy because they're just so damn expensive. Luckily, these were on special as well. So this lovely pale pink floral linen cotton blend was only $10 per metre, and I took the last of what was left in store, which was roughly 3 meters, and thankfully that was enough to make this dress. I wasn't originally planning on making this dress, but as soon as I saw the fabric, I was immediately drawn to it, and I had this pattern and I was like, that's the perfect fabric for a nice summer dress. So I've cut out the pattern, and as you can see here, I've got sleeve pieces, facing pieces, as well as the back and front pieces of the bodice. And I'm just going to walk through the steps that I did to make this dress rather than the instructions on the pattern. So starting with the darts on the bodice, there are 2 darts in the back and then 4 darts in the front. 2 of those are bust darts. And I'm just sewing those on the main fabric, but I am also repeating that process for the lining fabric as well. Now, the pattern didn't have any lining, it's just the main outer fabric and that's it. Maybe that's how they did it back in the 1940s, I'm really not sure. This is my first time ever attempting to make a vintage pattern, or a pattern based on a vintage pattern. If you know anything about 1940s patterns or garments made in the 1940s, whether or not they had lining, please let me know, and also let me know what type of fabrics they used. I just chose linen and cotton because it's nice and cool, and it's very breathable, and it's perfect for the weather that I've got where I live right now. Anyway, back to what's happening in these videos. So in this clip, I'm sewing together the skirt panels, and I'm only sewing together the center front and the center back, so not the side seams just yet. And now I'm just pressing the darts, and as you can see here, there's the lining, so I didn't actually show the sewing of those darts in the lining fabric, but I am showing those being pressed out. And I also pressed the seam allowance open for the skirt panels, so this is either the center front or the center back seam, I can't tell. Both of the skirt pieces look the same, so yeah, doing that on both of the skirt pieces. So next I'm matching up the lining to the bodice pieces, and I'm pinning that down. Since the pattern doesn't have any lining pieces, I wanted to attach these pieces together and treat them as one, as if it was one fabric, not 2 separate fabrics. So I'm sewing around the edges and I'm trying to keep within the seam allowance. However, if I was to do this again, I would sew large basting stitches so I can take out the stitches as the dress is constructed and the seams are actually sewn properly together. I also repeated this same process of attaching the lining to the outer fabric so they can be treated as one to the skirt panels. Moving on to the construction of the bodice, I'm now treating the lining and outer fabric pieces as one, and I'm stitching together the bodice pieces at the shoulder seams. The side seams of the bodice also get sewn together, except make sure to leave the left side open just a little bit for room for the zipper. For the facing around the neck, the front facing and back facing were sewn together, and then the edges, the raw edges, were folded inwards so they can be sewn down. And that's what I'm doing here, sewing those raw edges down so when the facing is on the inside of the garment there are no raw edges. Now I'm attaching the facing to the neckline of the main bodice, so matching right sides together and pinning at the shoulder seams and then sewing all of that down. The pattern also calls for two long stitching lines to be sewn down the center front of the bodice, and that's for the slit to be cut within, and that will allow the dress to fit over the head when worn. Those two stitching lines are sewn on both the facing and the main bodice. Time to clip the edges so that the facing will lie flat. And then I'm also cutting down the center front just to where the end of my stitching is to allow for that slit. Also cutting into the corners of the stitching, not into the stitching, just right to it, so when the facing is turned to the inside, everything lies really smooth and flat, and giving that a good press as well. Finally, to finish off the neckline, I'm just doing a simple top stitch around whole neckline. And I'm sewing this quite close to the edge, probably around 3/8 of an inch. Going back to the skirt panels, again I'm treating the lining and outer fabric as one layer, and I'm matching up the side seams so I can sew those down together. And I'm also leaving some room along the left side seam up the top for the zipper. So once the whole skirt is sewn together and you've got basically a tube with a slit for the zipper, you can attach the bodice to the skirt, and again right sides together, and I'm matching up at the notches that were on the pattern, and sew that all into place. Pulling out the bodice to separate it from the inside of the skirt and pulling the whole thing right side out, you can see that the dress is starting to take shape. There is still a gap in the left side of the dress where the zipper will be placed, but apart from that, the rest of the dress should be all sewn together. And it's also missing the sleeves, of course, as well. For the seam allowances on the inside of the dress, I trimmed those so they're quite narrow. And then what I was thinking of doing was folding over the one seam allowance that I still keep in length, so the raw edges will all be hidden with that one long seam allowance. However, looking back on this, I probably will not cut the seam allowances so short next time, simply because if I did want to alter it, or if a seam ripped and I needed to fix it, a very, very small seam allowance just doesn't cut it. So what you saw me pinning just then was the waistband seam allowance, or the waistline seam allowance, sorry, and I'm just top stitching that in place. So all of the seam allowance along the waist will be pressed upwards towards the bodice. And here you can see that the top stitching has been done, and that's what it looks like from the outside. Mine's a little wonky, but that's okay. Now to address that gap in the left side of the dress, so that's where the zipper is going to be placed, and I'm pressing down the seam allowance on both the front and the back panels of the dress. And then with the zipper, I'm doing a hand-picked zipper. That's what the instructions said to do, so that's what I went along with. I've never actually done this before. I've always sewn zippers using the zipper foot on the sewing machine, but I actually really like the way that this hand-picked or hand-stitched zipper turned out. It's really easy to do, and it is quite secure, I would say. I'm not sure if it would last in the sewing machine, sorry, not the sewing machine, the washing machine, but I probably will be hand washing this dress anyway. I'll keep you updated if you want to know whether or not this dress survives the sewing machine, not the sewing machine, the washing machine, because generally with my clothes, the ones that are dry clean only, I'm talking about my work clothes, I do generally wash them in the washing machine after doing some hand washing on them first, because I'm really that lazy that I can't be bothered hand washing everything that I wear on a daily basis. Anyway, back to the zipper. I'm sewing the other side of the zipper now, and with this side of the zipper I'm trying to overlap the fabric just a little bit over the other side. The instructions call for an overlap of 3 millimeters. I don't know how much of an overlap I was doing, but just enough so that when the dress is worn, the fabric meets just to cover the zipper. So we're nearing the end of the dress. We've got to attach the sleeves now. Again, I'm treating the lining and outer fabric as one panel, or one piece, or one layer, whatever you want to call it. So pinning those together and then sewing in the ease or gathering stitching along the sleeve head. It's not really gathering stitching, but I did adjust the stitch length so it would be a little larger, that I could rip the stitches out easily. And I also sewed the underarm part of the sleeve together as well. The sleeve was also hemmed with quite a wide hem. This wasn't following the instructions. I don't know why I didn't follow the instructions. I guess I found this easier, and also I do like the look of a wide sleeve hem, or even an invisible hem. That's what I'll do next time. I'll try and do some invisible stitching along the sleeve hem, and then attaching the sleeve to the dress. So the sleeve is attached right sides together, and I'm matching the notches that were marked, and then using the ease or gathering stitching along the sleeve head to try and ease the fabric to fit the arm side. When sewing the sleeve on, I went very, very slowly, lifting my sewing machine foot quite often and leaving the needle in, and then shifting the fabric so that there would be no puckering. I did probably get quite a few little tiny puckers, but nothing substantial enough to take the stitching out and then redo the sleeve. And then trimming that seam allowance. Next time I will not trim the seam allowance so narrow, for reasons being that it's harder to fix and mend when seams tear. Finally, the hem of the dress. I found that the length was way too long for my liking, so I'm modernizing the dress by shortening it just a bit. I was thinking of making it knee length, but I think just below the knee suits me better. So I attached the same lining fabric for the facing of the hem of the skirt, and then ironed that down, after sewing it down, of course, right sides together. And then I will be turning in the top edge of the lining by about ½ inch to 1 inch, and then sewing that down. And then that will leave hem stitching visible on the outside of the dress. A mistake that I made here was that I didn't actually cut the facing on the bias, so because of that it doesn't actually stretch with the rest of the dress, being the outside material, and so there is quite a bit of puckering along the bottom of the dress. I probably should just take out the stitching and redo the hem, and redo the hem in such a way that the lining is separate to the outer fabric. But that's another thing that I can just learn from. So here are some close-up detailed shots of the dress. I really like the neckline, and the inside of the dress has no raw edges on that facing. The sleeves have quite a wide hem, which I really like, and they're fully lined. And here you can see the top stitching along the waistline, and here's the hand-picked zipper, don't mind the chalk. And the zipper really glides nicely. I could do that one-handed. And there's the inside. I really like the way this was lined. I would definitely attach lining to the bodice in all the future garments that I make. Perhaps not the skirt, because as you can see here, there's a little bit of puckering going on along the bottom of the skirt where the lining fabric doesn't stretch as much as the outer fabric. And that's it. And here are some shots of me with the dress on. I styled it with some heels that my sister had, and this would be perfect for like a garden party or a wedding. Very springtime and summery, and the fabric is just gorgeous as well. And you can see how easy the zip is to undo. And it's really nice that it's hidden on the side and it's not an obvious zipper down the back of the dress. As far as the fitting goes, it fits me really well. And the movement is quite nice and the skirt holds its shape. I'm really pleased with how this turned out, and for my first vintage pattern make, I'm extremely pleased, and it makes me excited to do more vintage patterns in the future. Speaking of which, in the future I would add a pocket. I definitely need a place to put my phone at all times. I would lengthen the sleeves and overall pay more attention to the detail, especially with the lining fabric being treated as one with the outer fabric, to avoid any weird areas of mismatching. But apart from that, I'm really pleased with this dress. I hope to see you in my next sewing adventure, whatever it may be. In all honesty, it's probably going to be the making of this dress again, because I've decided that I need one for work. But I will try and make the video a little bit different, more of a pattern review rather than my whole process on making a dress. So look forward to that, and until then, make sure you stay creative.